In this episode, I'm joined by the amazing Tracey Ezard to discuss how to lead with ferocious warmth from the head and the heart. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Well-Led Schools podcast. I'm your host, Adrienne Hornby, school wellbeing consultant, strategist, and former school leader. Together with experts and real school leaders from across the world, we deliver insights and conversations that dive into what it truly takes to support staff wellbeing, strengthen school culture, and lead well with staff wellbeing in mind. In today's episode of the Well-Led Schools podcast, I am absolutely thrilled to welcome one of Australia's warmest leadership thinkers and someone whose work I've honestly followed for years. Tracey Ezard. Tracey is a leadership expert speaker and the author of Ferocious Warmth, Glue and the Buzz. And today we're diving deep into what it means to lead with both ferocity to drive transformation and the warmth to truly connect with the people around you. So needed in education. If you've ever found yourself wondering whether you need to choose between being kind and being strong, between relationships and results, between the head and the heart, this episode is going to blow that idea completely out of the water. I'm not going to hold us back any longer for this incredible episode. Let's dive in. Tracey, thank you so much for joining me. It is an absolute joy and a pleasure to have you here today. I've already fangirled before we hit record, but thank you so much for joining me and the audience for today's conversation.
You are welcome. It's great. I'm so looking forward to our conversation. I just know that we've got so much threads running between our work that is extraordinary. So, really looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I actually initially came across you years ago when I first got into this work. I started working with a Victorian school. And so from there, my research and love for you grew. And then now I get to interview you today. So I'll stop. I'll calm down. Tracey, to start, what's one thing that you do personally to prioritize your own health and or well-being?
I do lots. I've learnt lots over the years to do it. But one of the things that I reckon is really useful for all of us to think about is I really prioritize making sure I'm having my health checks and tests done. So 2 years ago, I was a bit slack with that and my heart went out of rhythm. And then it went back in rhythm and I could have just left it. But I went, no, I think I should get this checked out. And it ended up that I had almost 3 blocked arteries in my heart and I had to have open heart surgery. And, I am not your stereotypical person that and I didn't have a heart attack, which was really, really great. But, different times of our lives does different things. And, menopause hit me and I did not know my cholesterol had gone right up. But I also didn't know that I had cardiovascular disease where I'd probably been laying down plaque since I was 20 or something. And I've always eaten pretty well and I'm fit and but you just never know. And so I am really on point now with making sure all my bloods are up to date. If anything's a bit weird, that I have the tests. And when I work in both education and health is my other sector that I do a lot of work in. And I ask people, how many people in the room have had a really good health checkup lately? It'll be like 2 or 3 hands go up. And I know we focus a lot on what are we doing from a holistic view around health and wellbeing, but I think also just checking that the medical side of stuff is right. Well, it saved my life, that's for sure.
Oh, definitely. And before I actually took my health and wellbeing work into schools, I was doing it personally one-on-one with individuals and did a lot of work alongside people to get their health in check with doctors and their psychologist support as well. I was like the coach, I was the in-between. So saw a lot of blood work. And what was really fascinating was people even who were really struggling with high stress or low mood or low energy, a lot of the time, a lot of their nutrient stores were out as well, which then began to have an impact on so many of their bodily systems. And you mentioned as women, how much our hormones shift, pre-kids, after kids, menopause, and the impact that that can have. And it's important for us, even as leaders and as men and as women for the opposite sex too, to recognize that there are definitely shifts throughout women's lives or people's lives that
Absolutely.
can be so linked to their hormones and less about work and just more about what's happening in their bodies. Then
Yeah,
that has an influence on their work capacity.
absolutely. And I've always been really focused. I work with a great nutritional scientist who's always helped me around high performance and all those things. So we
Yeah.
were keeping pretty close eye on all that sort of stuff. And I was, supplements and also just, being more mindful of a healthy lifestyle.
Mhm.
And in a way, to be perfectly frank, I was a little bit like, oh, Western medicine, it's so just about treating the symptoms, not the cause, and all that sort of thing. I was just a little bit dismissive of it, if I
Yeah.
want to be really honest, because I was doing all this other stuff to surround it. But what I really know is that it's just such a critical core component because it can alert you to stuff that we can miss completely. And so
Yeah.
how do we make sure we're making time? And most of the people that I work with, and I'm sure they put it right down the bottom of the priority list.
Oh,
Haven't got
yeah.
time to get my doctor, haven't got time to go and get that blood test or, put in that sample or whatever, or do, if you're over 50 and listening, do the good old um, cardboard box that comes when you're 50 to do your bowel check, all those sort of things. I probably used to just go, oh, I don't need that. And now I go, saved my
Well,
life.
by nature, we're very reactive rather than proactive. And that comes
Yeah,
about in leadership too. I think it's just our personality and our
absolutely.
personality style as humans. But you make such a great point that keeping on top of those checks can, of course, impact us personally, but and who then we bring to work as well.
Mm,
But
mm,
I thought about as you were talking, I went recently just down to our local gym and stood on one of those whole body scanners, and it tells you
yeah.
your whole musculoskeletal mass and your visceral fat and your
Mm,
subcutaneous fat, all of the different layers to give you a bit of an overall balance of where you can adjust things and up
mm,
your protein to protect your muscle as you get older, and all of those kind of initiatives and activities give us, I guess, a bit of motivation and then guidance. And as you
yeah,
said, then work with a practitioner there to support you.
absolutely.
Great
Absolutely.
reminders for everybody listening.
Mhm.
Tracy, for those who may not know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and the journey that led you to where you are doing what you're doing today?
Mm. So I do a lot of work around leadership and around professional cultures, and I've done that work for about 20 years. So it started in Victoria, and prior to that, I was a state system leader, and teacher, and so I'd come up through the Victorian state system. I did something called TRIP, which was Teacher Release to Industry program that was run, and it was a great initiative between the Department of Education, the AEU, so the union, and VECI, the Chamber of Commerce, and it ran for about 10 years, and there was about 50 teachers a year. We would apply for a position of middle to upper management in industry, and you had to go through the interview process, etc. And then you went out. So it was seen as like the sort of almost like the Rolls Royce of professional learning, because you went
Mhm,
out and you actually became immersed in that organisation for a year, and then you
mhm,
went back to the school. So it was a great program, and I got to go to the Automotive Training Board, National Training Board. So, and it was at the time where Australia did not have a cohesive training package, certificate 2, certificate 3, certificate 4 going into the pathways. And so all the states and the territories were working with the federal to create training packages that we now take for granted. So it was a really interesting year for me. I actually stayed out for another 6 months. Really interesting year for me to understand a little bit more around how much leadership matters, how do we create the dynamic where we're in it as a collective rather than adversarial?
mhm,
And I just started really noticing a lot of patterns and then linking those to the patterns I'd seen in great leaders in education or leaders that needed, quite a bit of work. Um, and Yeah, so I stayed out, and I could have stayed out and made that my career. I could have stayed out. I got an opportunity to go sideways into some of the big consulting firms around that. But I went back to schools because I really missed the students. I really missed the environment of the schools, and stayed there till I was, I think, one of the first assistant principals to have children, because it was moving from the old, your number used to have to be the right level before you could get a job. And I was one of the first merit positions. Um, and so I had my first child and job shared for a while, which I loved, the person I was job sharing with, but then decided to sort of leave, and thought, if I want to get back into education, I can just apply. And
Mhm.
so I then started working at a a three hat fine dining restaurant for a while. And that was
Oh,
my
wow.
brother-in-law's restaurant, Ezard, and I got to do the finance, the HR, the back of house stuff, and it was such a great learning curve. But again, for me, it just brought out the patterns of really great leaders and behaviours, and not only leaders, but what do teams do when they are really working, not only doing high quality, but actually it's a high quality environment for people to work in. So
Mhm.
it's not just about the result, but it's also about the relationships. And that's where the patterns of the leadership, the buzz framework, cultural framework that I have, that's about what the professional cultures really look like when they're thriving, and also where Ferocious Warmth emerged from all the work over, all of Australia when I started my business, moving in all of Australia over the UK and New Zealand, and just seeing lots of patterns and looking at what the evidence says around the leadership we need now, but
Mhm.
making it really practical for people to be able to grab. So that's just emerged as I've continued to work with thousands of people, is just really listening to those patterns and detecting them and talking to people about what works, what doesn't work.
I What an amazing journey. And as you were talking, I just jotted down here. I think the real power that came out of that experience was the ability to broaden your perspective and
Mm,
step into
mm,
lots of different spaces and out
mm,
of that one bubble to see the similarities and then the nuances and then the uniqueness of education and what we can pull from other organizations
mm,
um, or context and bring back into what we do in our space.
mm,
And I also deeply resonated with what you sort of finished with there around that listening to people and sitting with them and building that understanding to then go, okay, well, what is this model or what is it that we're really seeking and looking to infuse into what we do in order
mm.
for us to do things better?
Yeah,
And you talked then about ferocious warmth leadership. And for listeners who are unfamiliar with this, how would you define what that is? I know this is a massive question because when
yeah.
you read the book, there's so many different elements and we can move through those. But I guess
Mm,
what are those essential elements that distinguish it from other leadership models or maybe bring those other leadership models and approaches together? It's a very integrated and holistic approach
yeah,
as it should be.
yeah. Well, there's three real levels to it, and the top level is the based on the idea of the infinity loop, and it's around energy coming from both the head and the heart, the skills coming from both the head and the heart, and you can see that one side is more around the head, the cognitive, what are the skills, what's the rational, what's the strategic view we've got, what's the tasks, how do we need to do this? And then on the other side is the heart work, the emotional intelligence, the connection, the feeling of being able to connect to people and bring in the empathy and the compassion. So this idea that they should not have to sit at either ends, but they're a nuance of hand in glove, and that the context in the middle is the important thing. Is, do I read the context? Do I understand how much of a blend of head and heart, results and relationship driven I need to be in this instance? And so our
Mm,
self-awareness is so important. This
mm.
ability, and so I think, leadership is so messy. It's nuanced. How we work in one instant, we walk out and walk into another conversation, we've got to shift and have a different focus. So that idea of that we're not fixed, that we can't have one leadership style. We can have a preference,
Yeah.
yep, but actually we need to be able to pull from what is required and what's in front of us, and then have an understanding of where we're at. So that's sort of the main top model. That's a very movable model. Around it are the four, is what I sort of call the ring of truth, and it's the four elements, the four values that I see time and time again. There's a lot of patent detection over 20 years that has gone into this. That, and I had a principal the other day email me and say, look, I've got those four up and your model up on the wall, and they are the values that I hold myself to every day. And that was just so heartening to hear. The expansive one at the top, that is being the lead learner and not taking learning as rhetoric, that I expand my thinking. People who are listening to this podcast, they're showing their expansiveness by going, I'm willing to have my thinking stretched by Adrian's podcast, and the people that she has on there. That expansive level of, am I willing to challenge my own thinking? Because I reckon we can get really good at challenging other people's thinking and not necessarily our own. And I think that's where it starts. So the expansive is also, so it's about me as a learner, but it's also about leading the learning culture that we know is so critical for performance, that we are willing to get out of our comfort zone, try things. Connected very much around the heart, connected to self, connected to others, connected to purpose. So that's big, and I'm sweeping through it, but I know that people will go, oh, that's the heart work. That's the really important relational work. Down the bottom, authentic. Authentic for me is not about what you see is what you get and suck it up if it doesn't work for you. It's about always having that humility to go, I'm always trying to bring my best self. And I know that I can't do this work without great collaboration with other people. So there's a humility that comes, I think, with authentic leaders, but they also allow others to see them, right? To see them and to build that relationship with them. I have this terminology I call professional intimacy, that people actually feel that you see their humanness before their worthiness, So, and I think it's one of the biggest game changers when people feel that they are seen by their leaders. And then the last one is courageous, because if we want to be transforming the work, moving to what our students really need in this super complex world that we're living in now, we've got to make some courageous calls. We've got to be able to lift the bar in the areas we need to lift. We've got to be courageous about experimenting with things and making sure that we're looking at the impact that it's having. So those four are sort of like, these are the values, and I have a whole set of principles that sits underneath them. And there's actually a third level, which is the skill-based stuff, and that is the three intelligences. And that would be most of the work that I do with people, is building that skill of emotional intelligence. This model sitting at the bottom is, what skill level do I need to be able to do this? So there's the strategic intelligence, there's the emotional intelligence, and then there's the learning intelligence. So you can sort of see how they sit underneath it. And I think we need to be developing skills in all three, so that we can have that skill base to be able to then have the capability to have the adaptability between the head and the heart. So that, in a little nutshell, is what it's all about. But I know that you know the model quite well in terms of dunking into that. Certainly most of the work that I would explicitly do with people is really just sitting at that understanding of our strengths from a heart and a head perspective, a relational and a results driven, and understanding where my strengths lie, and then where do I pull them from both sides, depending on what is needed here. And where's my stretch? What are the ones that I actually need to develop more? And what am I doing to help to develop it more?
What I really loved about the book was the definition of drawing from both sides, so from the head and the heart, and sort of typically how it looks in the research, or how I've come across it and presented it in schools, is that hard and soft leadership skills. They talk about it in that way, but as you were talking before, and as I read the book, you think you need to be one or the other all the time, and you're sort of flipping backwards and forwards. And maybe that's how we start off as we're practicing and developing our skills. But the book really beautifully outlines the paradox of yet. So, you could be objective yet compassionate. So it's about holding space for the two.
Yeah.
Is there, I guess, a bit of normalcy for people who are still on their journey, as we are? I think our whole leadership career is a journey, and we're
Yeah.
constantly evolving. I never say we're improving our leadership.
No.
I talk about evolving it based on our age, the stage in our life, the cohort of staff, the cohort of students, the community, whatever it might be. But is there, that normalcy in sometimes going, okay, it's the head or it's the heart, although we're always aiming for the yet, to have that, the head yet also infuse the heart into our work?
Yeah, I think for me that's the skill that we're always evolving. So that expansive element you're talking about there around where is it that I get the balance right? So I often think about a gin and tonic. That sometimes you need more tonic. You don't need any gin. You don't need any of the head. You don't need any of the strategy, the solving the
Yeah.
problem. You just need to hold the space for someone to be, because maybe they're incredibly upset and all they need is your empathy. They don't need, solution focused. I think sometimes so it's about being able to do this blend of when do I need to bring one side up. So I was talking yesterday with a couple of people around the fact that they are showing incredible support to a couple of people, but actually what's happening is they're getting into a loop where they're now rescuing because those people are not taking any responsibility for actually taking accountability for doing things differently. So I sort of said to them, is it that, you're actually, do you need to build in that accountability for them to say around what you expect of them? And I think often I work with people, I'm sure you do too, that are very compassionate. And
Oh,
what they
yeah.
worry about is, oh, if I do that, does that mean that I'm going to upset them or they won't talk to
Mm.
me or whatever it might be? But in actual fact, leadership is about being able to hold the space for people to grow and give the expectation that they will grow
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
expectation. And so there's an example of, if you stay too much on one side and you're not getting the outcomes and the shift and the change you need, actually, we do need to maybe up the expectation, the strategy.
Mm.
Okay, what are we going to do? What do I need you to have with me when we come to meet next week? And just that that blend of compassion and accountability would probably be one of the biggest growth areas when I work with leaders at looking at doing is how do I language things so that people understand that I absolutely have them, but I also have an expectation of something that they might do. Um,
Mm.
the only thing I would say is going back to the gin and tonic analogy, I suggest to people we should never do a gin shot. Right? So we should never just go hard full on into speaking in a way that has not got any sort of care in it. Even if we are in crisis mode, doing things in a way that inflicts trauma on other people is not on. And so some people go, is that what ferocious is? No, it's not. You can't. Ferocious warmth is about when we're focused on what do we need to do, you still know that there's care there. Now, it doesn't mean I'm slowing down. If we're in crisis mode, we're going to just go head down and we do it. But I have built relationship with you so that you know we're going here because we have to go here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have been burnt over the years with people that have seen that being strong and being a strong leader means that I lose my humanness. So that hard and
Mm.
soft skills, like we've just got to blow that out of the
Yeah.
water. I know that I've worked with
Warm
thousands of
skills.
people where then they are not soft because they are
Mm.
incredibly bloody hard.
Yes.
And it like that came out of the corporate world, and
Mm.
I went and saw Esther Perel last week, and she's an amazing woman that's the global guru around couples intimacy, but she also does workplace relations, and she has for a long time. And for her to say we've got to realise that the soft skills are actually the hard skills, and to
Mm.
go, oh, yes, yes, and I can't believe that people are still making them different. So
Mm.
this head and this heart there is rationale, there's structure, there's systems, there's plans, there's strategic plans, there's cognitive reasoning, but blend it when in a way that gets the right outcomes, with empathy, with care, with emotional intelligence on what do people need. This is why so many change things fail, is because people are going so much for the cognitive stuff that they forget to
Yeah.
go, what do people need to be able to emotionally move through this as well?
Thinking too much into the strategic. And it's when you're speaking, Nate, it's human nature to let the pendulum swing with everything. We go really extreme on one end and then we rebel against that and swing back the other way. And I
Yep.
had an interaction with a leader recently who has been a really warm leader for a while. And as a result of focusing so much on relationships and they're not enough in the head, uh, things have sort of begun to slip away at the school. And he said to me, "Oh, after our review process, we've been told that we're too nice and that needs to change next year." And I sort of thought, okay, well, we're being a little bit extreme here. I said, we look at many of the strengths or many of the achievements and celebrations that have come out of your school too, as a result of you being very
Mm,
relationship. So can we not hold space for you still caring about people and relationships and being nice, as well as setting a level of expectation and accountability and shared norms in our space so that both things can be true and both things can work. But it's almost like, yes, we just have to swing one way and then
absolutely.
go full
Yep.
extreme the other, where it's
Yeah.
about finding that middle ground. And that's the beauty of that infinity symbol.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of places that are in that, we can suffer from the land of nice. When I work with a whole school, there will certainly people will understand that if we want to really move up to co-creation together and build a collective vision for what we're trying to achieve, and then take on responsibility and accountability in our teams, in our individual growth, as to what do I need to look at to change, what do we need to really pull apart, you know, data-wise, moderation-wise, pedagogically, what are we doing, and we're getting the outcomes, then that fact that we actually feel connected to each other is critically important. I've had over 16,000 people go through the Buzz diagnostic over almost 700 schools. There's really clear benchmarking of the data that shows that when schools that have strong levels of trust and connection within the school are also able to have robust pedagogical debate, to work as a learning collective together
Mm.
and feel safe to collaborate together. So there's an example of psychological safety being the head and the heart together, high challenge, high support. Schools that are right down the bottom of the culture ladder, often they are low on all of those scores, low
Mm.
on all of them. And so this is the work. It's not just about the what do we need to do. It's what's the quality of the relationships that are going to allow us to do it. And I think one of the curious questions to ask ourselves is, do we turn up as a learning collective? Are we
Mm.
willing to actually challenge ourselves around what we're doing well and where do we need to grow? And I think when we've got really lovely environments, it's about asking those curious questions and playing lightly with it to say, if we were to look at this and just go, where is it that we collectively see that we want to grow? I always find when I do that work with teams that they will identify, yeah, actually, I think we do. We all want to step into peer observation more. We want to look at each other. We want to learn from each other. And I think people are really willing to do it. We've just got to be asking the right questions and having the right expectations around this is where we're going to be moving to, because we know this is really great practice in schools when we
Mm.
really do push ourselves as professionals and grow and keep on evolving.
Oh, definitely. And I'm mindful now of some people listening who, and I can do it too. I think, again, it's human nature, gravitating to work towards certain points of what you're saying and maybe grabbing onto that and not considering all that it actually takes. So, are you saying that we should focus solely on relationships before we do any of those other things? Or is it about injecting the relationship work into the strategic practice work
Yeah,
at the same time?
that's right. It's
Yeah.
it's it's certainly not. In fact, um, there's it's not a lot of really great, strong research in trust in culture, and so what I'm saying is that they actually build together. And some of the original research that is now probably getting over a decade old was that when we have, and this is certainly my lived experience of this, when we have conversations that people care about the work, and we set the parameters on how do we want to turn up and how do we want to show up to have these conversations, people will step into them. Quite often we're fearful of them, or we haven't set those expectations. If we're going to have a conversation around this, what behaviours we want to bring to the table? I sort of think bleh around norms and protocols sometimes, because I think they're so bland. They don't, one of my first indicators on do we have a collective growth mindset, right? Which we talk about growth mindset, but I think it's the collective growth mindset that's hard, because we need to be vulnerable with each other. The first one is, have we discussed and committed to the behaviours of learning? Right? So not the behaviours of the students we're teaching, but our learning. What does that look like? What does it look like when my point of view is challenged? What does it look like when we're looking at data that actually really confronts me as an educator, because maybe it means that I'm not hitting the mark with my students, I think we need to talk about that. That's what I find the sweet spot is, when we allow people the opportunity to talk about the fact that this is hard, this is challenging. So how do we want to be for each other? What safety nets do we want to put in for each other so that we're willing to step out of that comfort zone and do that? When we work with that and take it to that level, then I find people are really open to stepping in and going, yeah, we do complex work, and it continues to be complex, and we're faced with huge change and expectations and a whole range of things. So how are we turning up so that we can discuss this well and take actions forward? That's a combination of a head and a heart conversation, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Well, you mentioned about norms there, and it's true, and they're all the rage and they're the buzz. But the norms aren't just the spoken rules. I actually think the beauty of the norms comes out in the process of discussing, I guess, the things that are a bit frustrating for us or
That's
rumbling
it.
in that conversation, and then we reword it as the positive. But
Yeah.
it's the sitting and it's the listening, it's the consultation, it's the involvement.
Yeah.
That's the magic in the norms process, and then
Yes.
it's continuing to hold the line or the initiative and deeply embed those. And I find it in my work too. We the main bread and butter, I guess, of my work is developing a wellbeing action plan and a framework. So it's just having your strategic priorities and practices set in
Mm.
over a few years. But I say to the leaders all the time, they go, "We can't wait to have an action plan." I'm like, the action plan isn't it. The it is the consulting with staff. It's listening to them. It's hearing their ideas and suggestions and strategies. It's learning about them. It's them learning about you and you being vulnerable and sitting in the challenge of hearing that feedback on your leadership and then using that with authenticity and power to move forward. It's never in the plan and it's never in the PD. It's all in those conversations if
Yeah.
we allow that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the collaborative culture of going into where do we need to be in co-creation. So rather than
Mm.
just cooperating and just rolling stuff out, where is it that co-creation is really super important? And
Yeah.
that is where the high trust comes from, because we're having those conversations. That's where I call those top two levels the land of growth.
Mm.
The middle levels are where we just keep on maintaining what we do, and because that's what we've always done, and it's important, and the coordination, cooperation, critically important. But where are our leverage points that we need to go in and have those conversations? And I absolutely agree with you. We don't have enough good co-creation at that top level. So
Mm.
I have a strategy compass where, the action plan's right down the bottom, and then the strategic goals are the next level up. But right up the top is, what's our outcome? What are our big vision purposes? And then what's the head and the heart stuff? What's the evidence base that we're pulling this for? Why is this important? And what do we believe? And it's the belief stuff that I think we don't talk enough about.
Mhm.
It's the stories and the narrative we don't talk enough about and we don't share enough about. But we get frameworks, let's get all the policies and all that sort of stuff. But what's the heart work that actually brings this to life? That's the richness of a conversation. The I don't know, I'm sure you find this too, but, sitting and having conversation with people in different schools and hearing both the really challenging, tragic stories that are going on, but also these amazing, incredible lifts and inspirational work that's going on as well. We don't
Mm.
share those stories enough. And
Oh,
when
yeah.
we do it as colleagues, it connects us. Like, so the vagus nerve and between the head and the heart, it is really in sync because we are feeding each other's souls in a way because we're actually talking about the stuff that really matters rather than what's the measurement of that? What's
Mm.
the, what's the outcome we're after? I, I think that if we're going, what's our why are we doing this? If we're saying to lift our student outcomes, then I think that's really small thinking. That
Mm.
yes, lifting our student outcomes. That's a result of this work. That's one of the outcomes of the work. But our vision is to create an education, perhaps. Create uh, uh, students who have such a rich love of learning or a love of reading or whatever it might be that carries through their life. That should be our vision. And
Mm.
one of our outcomes of our strategies would be to increase outcomes.
Oh, I agree with you. I wish more schools had a vision of creating a school where every single person in that school and community is learning and thriving.
Yeah,
Because what's more motivating for students to
that's it.
watch their educators learning and thriving and then the leaders learning and thriving? I
Yeah,
mean, I think that's ultimate life learning
that's
is
it.
watching the adults around you doing that. But you're right, it does. It always comes back to this focus on students. And I get it's hard to sort of shift out of that mindset when that's what's drilled into us
No,
from the get go.
I think we've got to push back on that. And we've just got to go,
Yeah,
okay,
I agree.
improving student outcomes is an outcome. Absolutely. And it's one we're driving for because it's a real measure of success that we use in our systems.
Mm,
And yet, what do we believe to be our driving purpose in education at this school?
mm,
That's an exciting conversation to have.
mm.
And yes,
Yeah.
we know we want to get the outcomes. And yes, we're going to be tracking that. Yes, we're going to be looking and using that as a really critical head piece, the cognitive piece that is driving what we're doing. But let's not lose sight of the fact that we have got 24 beautiful, beautiful people in front of all those, in front of us that have all these relational stuff and the well-being stuff that we want to help thrive because we know that also helps them thrive in their learning. So
Mm,
yeah, I think it just getting some inspiration. I feel like sometimes in a lot of places around education at the moment, we've lost our inspiration
mm.
and
Oh, definitely.
it's
We're
just
in the
becoming
most purpose-filled
transactional.
passion.
Yeah.
Sorry, purpose-filled profession there is. And you mentioned it before. You can be so focused on the bad news and the media doesn't help. And I did a lot of research last year into staff morale, and there was just so many threads and through lines through all of those research papers around how education is constantly perceived as a stressful or a hard job. And it
Yeah.
is. I'm not trying to discredit how challenging it can be, but we'd be hard pressed to find another profession or job that's this rewarding. And I
Yeah.
think it's our job as leaders in a school and as departments, I'm thinking more about within our realm of influence to to promote more of that positivity and affinity with the work,
Yeah.
so that we can increase morale and shift our mindsets and perspective around it too.
It's often a question I ask leaders. We will talk about what's something that has brought you that joy, that connection to purpose. And then I'll sort of say, does anyone build in with design, um, focusing on the things that are going well? And again, it's just a spark of curiosity to say, how are we focusing also on the stuff that we're doing really well and really right?
Yeah.
Because often we can just get into that rut and our neural pathways get into that rut where all we're looking for is what are the problems. And so
Yeah.
we have to rejig ourselves, don't we? Reset
Yeah.
sometimes and go, actually, there's, let me go. I call it a wonder wander. Let me go with a lens of finding the stuff that's great for a while
Yeah.
because that's going to be good for my own well-being. But gee, it means I can talk to people about what I can see is just doing really well. We know this with students.
Mm,
How do we chunk it up for the people that
that's right.
are in the school?
Yeah, that appreciative inquiry rather than always just looking for the next bout of improvement.
Yeah.
As you were talking there, I just thought about the importance here around leadership alignment
Mm.
in this. You know, when you were even talking about trust, and you mention it in the book, and you know, when we look into the research around the life cycle of trust, it always begins with rapport building and establishing trust, but then there's a real art in maintaining trust, but sustaining it as a leadership team.
Mm.
So we can form lots of great relationships in our pockets right across the school. But unless we're truly aligned in our approach as a leadership team, sustaining that trust and then being able to see the results of that work in school and student outcomes. And I mean staff as part of that outcome as
Mm.
well. We're
Mm.
thinking about retention
Mm.
too. That's the step that I feel is it's almost like the biggest step that we've got lots of leaders trying to clamber up over. What are your thoughts around that space in terms of aligning everybody? Because there might be leaders tuned in today who are principals who are like, I fully believe in this, but I don't see alignment in my leadership team, or even middle leaders or aspiring leaders who are like, yeah, this is how I would love to approach my leadership. But actually aligning a whole team, that's the challenging part. You know, what's the rumble, or what's the process? I know it's probably huge for how you can begin to shift that and build momentum for that in a school.
Yeah, I think it's where you start. Because we can't go in and go, we need to shift culture, or we need to, shift what we're doing. We need to look, without actually going, how do we do it as a leadership team?
Yeah.
And so that's often where I'll start, and it can be quite fraught at the start because what
Yeah.
we can be doing is working with people that have a really strong belief in how they work, and so it's a bit of dismantling. That actually, how do we go in and as a leadership team have some real self-awareness of who we are first? And what do we know about self-awareness? Over 95% of us say, yep, we're self-aware, but research would show that only about 15% of us are. And so that I do a lot of work around getting people to a space of just being willing to step in and spend some time, because leaders are so busy, spend some time focusing as a team, but individually within that, and with, different processes. Who am I? What do I stand for? What is my driving purpose around it? What are my strengths? And we do Ferocious Warmth, and we dive into it. Um, and then look at, well, what do we believe is important coming in? What are the functions of a high performance team that we need to adhere to? And we know the number one is trust, but it is also about being willing to have that more challenging conversation, because if you can't have it in your leadership room, you can't have it anywhere. So are we able to really say what we believe in front of each other? Are we able to tease it apart? And often that's a skill building thing we need to do, because we're often not given those skills. It's assumed that we talk a lot, so therefore we must be good at having good debate. But I would say some of the most important work I can do with a senior team is to help them to build their muscle around what I call the robust ideological debate muscle, the RID muscle. Because challenges safety, from a psychological safety space, that it's the top level that is around, I feel safe to challenge people's thinking and challenge my own thinking and be really curious, and not have a lot of social friction, because we trust each other so much. We've got each other's back, but we actually see our role is to have good intellectual friction where needed. So alignment has to have friction within it for it to be alignment. And I think a lot of places, what they do is we hide our friction. But in the end, what happens is we have non-alignment, because we're not talking about the stuff where we have rub, where we have things that aren't quite sitting right. And so, and that comes from both a relational and a results-driven approach that says, let's make sure we do see each other as co-creators in this leadership of this place, and that we don't see ourselves as competitors. And so what does that mean strategically? Right? So we've all got strategic goals, but actually where is it we're supporting each other to do that? If you've got someone who's head of teaching and learning, and then you've got someone who's head of wellbeing, both of them actually lead teams, but they don't actually help to embed what the other person's trying to do then oh, well, I'm not in charge of that. No, but what's your role in supporting and using the messaging and, um, helping to make sure your team is doing it? I think there's some really interesting nuance that often teams don't talk about. That's why in the book, I do have those grayed out reflective pauses, because a lot of leadership teams, what they do is they read the book all together and then they go, okay, let's sit on this for a while and discuss it. Because if leadership teams aren't working on their own leadership, how can we expect teachers to work on their own teaching?
Yeah. Well, they're leading in their spaces. And like I
Whatever it
said
is they're
before,
doing.
we're all learning and we're all role modeling different skills which people pick up on.
And I think that the middle leadership is just critical.
Oh,
We have too many vertical silos we talk about. I reckon we've got too many horizontal silos, and that's actually a big issue, is building the skill of those people that are at the front line of their teams and just working with their teams and not giving them the skills to do it, or or not modeling it for them, not discussing it for them. We're sort of leaving people out to dry. So I think it's a really important thing.
I agree. And, when I sort of visualize or conceptualize leadership, I imagine it like a big mosaic.
Yeah.
All of the little bits and pieces of a leadership team are all different shapes and sizes and approaches and strengths, but we all come together to create something really beautiful.
Yeah.
And so there's art in that. And when you talked then about that middle leadership, I agree. They are the glue that hold everything together. But what I notice in schools they're really calling for is definitely alignment at that top senior leadership level rather than too many competing priorities, because then, of course, as we know, that creates that tension in the middle. And then how is the rest of the community then meant to
Mm,
sustain any kind of messaging or approach?
yeah.
And we talk a lot about in schools, you can all have different approaches and strengths and portfolios and projects, whatever it is, but your staff need that safety and that trust to know that whoever they come to on the leadership team is somewhat unified
Yeah.
in key messages or approaches or beliefs in the school.
Yeah.
And we'll all be in different journeys, and there's the art of our staff building a bit of perspective and compassion too for where leaders are at and what's going on for them as well. And
Mm.
that's where you talked about that collective approach. But that really comes as a result of that deeper level of work with a leadership team, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And it also is helping the leadership team to build those skills to be able to go and have those deeper conversations, so that the leadership team is not working in a vacuum. They're actually really, I use a lot the Heifetz and Linsky metaphor of the balcony and the dance, and how important it is to be able to actually go down to that dance floor and make sure you understand what's going on. But I sort of talk about in Ferocious Warmth around the art of the staircase. That's actually with this collaboration continuum. It's actually really going, how are we having deeper dialogue about stuff and understanding each other and doing more two-way transformational conversations, not just transactional ones. And so how do we make time for them, and how do we make sure we're making time for the right ones?
Yeah, and multimodal ways of doing that.
Mm.
I say to middle leaders in particular all the time, you cannot underestimate those incidental conversations that you have with people when you're
Yeah,
walking past and you're checking in on them versus those formal or those whole meeting discussions that we have when we're trying to get our ear on the ground to work out what's happening. It's that
yeah,
visibility. As you said, I love that analogy of the balcony and the dance floor and a
yeah.
staircase or a baby monitor. You just put your baby monitors out all
That's
over
it.
the school
That's it.
now.
I can remember a leader saying to me during COVID, I was talking about how, leadership teams coming together and actually really talking deeply about what was going on was how important it was. She said, yeah, my son, he was late 20s, he's actually realized how much he feels disconnected from those leadership meetings now, because he wouldn't be in them in the workplace, but he would be having those incidental conversations as they were going past people in the corridors and things like that. And that we stripped out that staircase opportunity a lot through those times. And so, leaders who never go and sit down and just have a chat with people around, who we are as human beings, but also what's going on, how are you feeling, um, what are you thinking about this? That they are so incidental often, and they help to feed up really great things for leaders to make more on balance decisions.
Absolutely. I was working with a school we began a couple of years ago, and some of the initial feedback out of our scan and our survey and our review of the data and consultation from staff was I wish leaders would come down off their ivory tower and come and have a conversation with
Yeah.
us every now and then.
Yeah.
And how that's evolved. And it's and what I like about your model that's up on screen now is
Mm.
that you don't go down from corrosion right up to collective capacity. You generally move through things in stages and
Yeah.
phases. That's a realistic approach. But they're now at this level I've noticed where the leaders said, oh, maybe we could make senior leadership meeting minutes more available to staff. And I was like, okay, that's a great. I need to be mindful that that's the journey that they're on. But ideally, of course, it's we're speaking with one another about the issues that were raised and the decisions that have been made, and at an individual level as well as a collective level, asking how people feel about that to build our perspective. And it's probably the biggest shift I found in my leadership in this work is that things are never black and white. They're always grey. And having a knowledge and understanding of a wide variety of views and opinions on anything is where we find some kind of common approach, as opposed to just hearing the ones that we only want to
Absolutely.
hear, or from that group of staff who are in that despair or fearful stage and highly cynical.
Yep.
It's really about learning that breadth of perspective, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, being willing to shift and change, because quite often I
Yeah.
know when I go and do some discovery stuff around what's really going on, we go, actually, what maybe we thought we might do as an approach, no, we need to back away from
Yeah.
that and do something else. Um, the model that's the collaboration continuum that's on the screen there, it's really about where do we mindfully need to be going into co-creation and when do we not? Because we don't want to be there all the time because it's just not it's not useful. This is about quite what are activities that we should be really up in co-creation. So whereas which is different, I think, to that conversation around just doing that pulse check that where are things at around a whole range of things and being willing to go and have those conversations. One of our biggest challenges as humans is making those assumptions that come just from our lens. So as you say, just making sure that we've got perspective that's not biased. It's not we're always going to get a bias. We know that, but that just that filter of I'm only hearing from 3 people, and they're saying always, and this is what's going on, and then I go and check it out and actually go, well, actually, I think there's a bit more of a different perspective that's going on there. We've got to be open to having those conversations because if we're sticking our heads down in the sand, it'll just fester.
Yeah, and I think then to complement that, it's then sharing what we've learned more openly to build the perspective of those with a different view. So I'm
Yeah.
thinking about, you talked about it in the book of being that 15% of our stuff. And, sometimes they're called blockers or those down in those despair or fearful stages. I think a often underused strategy is to do a lot more discussion or open data share or open feedback into a consultative process or a co-creation
Yep.
where they can be given the opportunity to see that a broad or a large range of people think differently from them too, so that they then don't stay in their vortex or their thinking and perspectives
Yeah.
as well. It's really underused in schools.
Well, and I think that what almost goes before that is a really strong foundation of what does it look like, to echo my words before, for us to turn up as learners. Because we can also have it where what we do is we have those smaller conversations, but there are people, I call them the enlighteners, that come to the table and they just tell everyone what their opinion is, and people are quite, they've got a lot of influence, they've got a lot of power, and people are not game to actually go, I don't agree with that. So we've got to set up the right conditions for that, don't we, to be able to have. And so I think the framing around how is it that we hear people's perspectives, using protocols, using processes if you need them in your professional learning, getting people to have self-awareness where they might just overshadow people's thinking because they're coming with their perspective. So I think we talk so much about what we're doing, but I don't think we talk enough about how do we want to do this? How do we want to show up to do this? What does it mean if I actually shut up and listen for a bit more rather than just telling people what I think, Where am I surprised by what someone else thinks? How do I make it
Mm.
safe for someone else? Because we're talking psychological safety here, really. If we don't have the psychological safety in the room, it's very hard to have that. So how do we do that in a way where we're setting up processes so voice and contribution is
Mm.
able to happen? In high quality teams, you don't need them as much because they've got into this rhythm where people absolutely know the way that brings out the best thinking, and they've done that work. But if we haven't done that work, we can't expect people to be able to do it well.
It's around having this. What I'm hearing there is having the skills and structure for those collaborative experiences to go well, rather than going, "Oh, we need to improve
Yeah,
collaboration," or staff are wanting more time to come together and
yeah,
plan. But the wheels fall off the cart when you put everybody in a room together
yes,
and they're
that's
not
it.
actually able to
That's
work
it.
together.
Yep. And I
Yeah.
think that's why, a lot of strategies, you can look at the strategies and go, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that, we do need to do that. Have we got the the culture of momentum and deep learning and curiosity and experimentation that we need to be able to move that strategy forward? And generally, if you do, then that's a school that's got really good evolution improvement going on. If we don't, if we're struggling with that, all of those are going to be really hard to move.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. This leans into, I guess, the question I asked earlier, which was maybe at times when it becomes a relationship struggle, it's not that we haven't been prioritizing relationships, it's that the skills and the structures and the frameworks and practices weren't there in the first place that has then caused
Yes.
a deterioration or an impact on the relationships in a
Yeah.
school. So it's again about coming back to finding that balance. So not going too heavy then on the structures and the skill development and not on enough on the relationships,
Absolutely.
but where we're at and then how much gin or how much tonic we're pouring back in.
Mm. And
Yeah.
I think coming to all of it with compassion is so important,
Yeah.
that um, the because really what we can see in cultures where there's low levels of connection, trust, um, it's often that the quality of the conversation is quite punitive, it's persecuting, and not necessarily, I'm not talking necessarily leaders to teachers or support staff. It can be the other way round as well,
Mm,
where what we're seeing there is actually people that are in fear. Right? It
mm,
doesn't feel safe here. So the way I do it is amygdala hijack. I'm either going to attack or I'm going to withdraw. And that's when cultures are really in a struggle. Or so I have a culture ladder that will pop up where, it does start at corrosion down the bottom, and then it goes right up to committed collaboration. And so that the space down the bottom of the culture ladder of corrosion and complacency is where what we're doing is we're actually in survival. So it's really hard to move anything forward because that's what's going on. And then it moves up to confusion and controversy, where confusion, we know we want to do something, we're just not too sure what it is we need to do, but we have this willingness to go, we know something's got to shift. The
mm,
next one up, controversy, is where we know where we want to head to, but we might be a bit split around how we do it. And I find that there are many, many schools in that position at the moment because of the major shift around how we are teaching now, and that the pendulum has so swung on that there are a lot of people in quite a lot of distress around it, and we're not necessarily going, where do we stand in all this, and having that dialogue. So controversy is when we are split around how we're going to do it. We move up to clarity
mm,
when we've got leaders that are really everyone's able to lead to the vision. They understand how they're working. There's a really strong learning culture in the teams, and it's moving forward. And then the top one, committed collaboration, is this is just the way we work. It's in our DNA at this school. You come into this school, we're learners together. We look at our practice. We're open about where we've stuffed up and where it's gone well. We learn from our mistakes. We are always talking with the student in the centre. And we've got each other's backs. We understand how important it is to have connection. Those schools up the top, the leaders could leave, but it's in the way that we work, and we're curious. We challenge our thinking, And that's the top of the culture ladder. And I do have schools that absolutely sit up there. And they're the ones I mentioned before in the data that have high levels of trust, connection, but also work as a really strong learning collective, open to feedback on their practice, and have good pedagogical debate, robust debate. So there, it's not just by chance that happens. It's by having a learning culture, professional culture of design that comes from how the leaders work together, to go back to your point earlier, and how we work as a cohort, not about you're not good enough, but about when we work together like that and believe we can evolve, there's no limit to what we can do, to pull from, Dylan Williams' view of culture. He's got this great quote around that I love using, because to me it's the epitome of the buzz, which is, if we can create a culture where every teacher believes they can improve, not because they're not good enough, but because they can be even better, there's no limit to what we can achieve. And for me, that's the work that I try to help people to do. And it's not about just every teacher, it's every adult in a school.
That's collective efficacy in its
Well, that's
definition.
exactly
Yeah.
right. And he said that way back. Like, I wrote The Buzz 2015 about 2 years before collective efficacy had been termed by Professor Haddany and his team, and there was a lot of research because that's a meta-analysis. There was a lot of research around that really supported this collaborative culture work. And so the Buzz is very much a playbook. It's just a little playbook on how do we create the mindset, the environment, and the dialogue to be able to have a really strong culture. And so for me, that was the epitome. So for me, the Buzz is the epitome of collective efficacy. I'll give you my sort of definition of what it is, because I love, when I saw Dylan Williams, I go, that's it. That's what I'm doing. So I say that the Buzz it's an energy in a culture that's built on collaboration, trust, and learning. It's an exciting place to be, with a buzzing learning zone. The sense of purpose is palpable, as is the willingness to find new ways of transforming the work. Sitting at the very core is the impact the Buzz has on the students. They thrive surrounded by adults who are focused on making a difference for them and their learning. Educators who learn and grow together, gaining momentum and collective.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
That describes the ecosystem of a school in order for us to get to that end goal. And as you were talking, two things I wanted to raise. One, I want to act as some of the staff or leaders I hear in school, but first, to affirm what you said. When you're talking about culture there, and culture and morale are so linked. And my deep dive into morale last year really spoke a lot about hope and optimism and belief that staff, that really is the undercurrent of morale. It's not, as we know, all of the after work drinks and the scavenger hunts that might build momentary moments of morale, but ultimately what fuels morale is staff belief and hope and energy that what they're doing is truly making a difference. And morale then influences our whole school culture. So all of that is so important. But so thank you. That was just such a beautiful way of explaining it. But I guess the thing that came up in my mind as you were speaking then, because I hear this so often, and I know that there's more to it than just this belief, but I hear so often from staff and leaders in schools, is the system or the department creates some of those barriers or those challenges, or they're constantly shifting the goalposts. As you mentioned, that change in curriculum, or particularly in Victoria, this big focus now on wellbeing, where the focus has always been so long on curriculum, and there's this push-pull between the two, and schools aren't sure how to fit it all in now to meet the wellbeing needs of students, but also, of course, improve things academically. So you hear so often around how that is so much harder to achieve because of the department or because of the system. And now I know that we can buffer and shield against that, and we can still create these ferociously warm learning environments for students, for staff, and for communities. But how do we do that practically and block out a lot of that noise or the constant tension that we feel externally?
I think naming it is the first step.
Yeah.
I think there's uh, when we work in a system, we work in a system, and so I think there's advocacy. So I'm really big on how is the department also making sure whatever
Yeah.
state, whatever sector we're in, because it's happening everywhere. There's this real shift around a whole range of things. It's challenging people's philosophical approaches to the way that they
Mhm.
work. So I think naming the tension is critical. And again, in a really strong culture, that's what we do. We name the things. We don't push them underground. And then it's about that locus of control that says, what do we have control about? Where is it that we actually still have absolute agency? And how are we making sure we are exercising it? Because quite often it can get skewed. It can get skewed right out. I know I've talked to someone who has put out, some lessons to support people, but people are taking them as that's the script and I must stick through it to it and I can't move out of it and all that sort of thing. And that comes from fear. That comes from a fear of not knowing what the boundaries are of what is something we have that is a non-negotiable compliance thing, and where is it that we actually have opportunity and agency to do it in the way that we know professionally we need to do it. And I think sometimes it gets bigger, especially if we're quite fearful. The we must do it this way can get a lot bigger than it was ever originally intended. So I think sometimes we have to just stop and we need to settle, and we just need to not see everything through a lens of panic, which can sometimes
Mhm.
happen, but see everything with pragmatic and be prepared to just put the line down and go, no, this is our line around this.
Yeah.
Um, but as a school, you've just got to be able to have those conversations, because otherwise it can foster then into just resentment against each other. Rather
Mhm.
than what the real issue is how do we actually work within this system, really making sure that we're doing what the system requires of us, but at the same time we are not feeling as if we are losing the essence of who we are.
Mm. Yes, I think it's a real call, particularly for senior leaders. And of course, as we've talked about, that being um, infused by our middle leadership team as well, but our senior leaders at least taking all of the push and the pulls and the information and the requirements and going, okay, we've got all of that. And then this is what we settle on as
Yeah,
how we are approaching this as a school
that's it.
community. And then being aligned in that approach to create that sense of safety and clarity for, as you said, very fearful, maybe anxious, overworked staff who
Yeah,
are, who
yeah,
are becoming totally overwhelmed
that's
by
it.
all of the information.
And trying their very best, but feeling really scattered and feeling very unsure and
Yeah.
uncertain. So we know, we are in an uncertain time. We're in
Yeah.
a time of huge complexity. I'm supposed to be going and working overseas really shortly, and I've just got this, there's a whole
Mhm.
lot of work that's sitting there and people that are sitting there expecting me to be there. And it's just this whole complexity of the global world we live in. And then we have our bubbles of our schools, but the complexity comes in every day when we walk in the door because we walk from that world into our school. And so that's that willingness to also go, how am I taking self accountability for making sure that I'm doing my well-being, doing the
Mhm.
stuff that I know I need to do so that this doesn't turn into unsought for resentment against the leadership when they're trying their hardest to actually make
Oh, yeah.
sense for me. So how am I turning up? Always comes back to, this is the title of my new book. How are we showing up? How are we showing
Mm.
up in this complex time to be able to support each other, because we all have positive intent with what we're doing. How do we do that to support each other, not corrode against each other? And what's at the basis of that is, are we having those really good head and heart conversations that very much come from a willingness and to see that we're in this together?
Mm. Definitely. Many leaders are probably feeling or may feel the pressure to do it all.
Yeah.
What advice would you give leaders trying to show up fully for their teams and or for their school if they're in senior leadership, whilst also protecting their own energy and resilience?
Yeah. We can't do it all, can we? That's all
Mhm.
there is. That's all there is to it, even though we'd like to. So I think that self-awareness piece of where is it that I drive myself, where this is actually me pushing this when I could actually put it down. I'll give you a link to one of my good friends who's written a brilliant book called Red Brick Thinking, and it is all about, she puts up a Lego. Donna McGeorge is her name. She puts up a Lego bridge where it's off kilter, and there's this red brick sort of making it all off kilter, and there's other Lego bricks, and she says, "How do you fix it up?" And everyone goes, most people go, "Oh, we just stick another Lego brick in and that'll even it back up." And then maybe a bright spark goes, well, what about if we just took the red brick away? And so her whole book is on the very personal approach to how do we look at our structural, cultural, and emotional red bricks and work out what do we need to take away? What do we need to do differently? What do we need to streamline? What is it that we're just doing it because it's habit? It's a great book. It sort of sits really nicely next to um, Dr. Simon
The
Breakspear
pruning,
and Michael Rosenbach's
yeah,
pruning
I was gonna
principle,
say the pruning
which is quite
principle, yeah.
strategic and organisational wide. This is very much around, and you can use it with your teams, but it's just it's a great one. Have a listen to Donna. She's a barrel of laughs. She's one of my best friends, and I just learn so much out from her around. Yeah, why are we carrying that? Why can't we put that down? It goes really nicely. The other metaphor I really love working when I talk with people around this is, we're juggling all these balls. And often they're really important balls and they're glass balls that we don't want to put down, but some of them are plastic and we can just go, the work is
Yeah.
never done. I was talking to a great leadership team the other day, and the principal was just saying to her team, we know our work is never done. What we've got to do
Mhm.
is actually look after ourselves and go, I'm leaving. And, one of them says, I don't take my laptop back at home anymore during the week. It's just something that I no longer do. So it's a red brick she's put down, because if it's there
Mhm.
with me at home, I'm tempted to do work when I should be with my family. And so
Yeah.
I think it's so hard for all of us, but and I know this is everywhere, but I just refuse to use the word busy anymore.
Mhm.
That if
Mhm.
if I'm busy, does that mean I'm actually not being very effective or productive or making time for the stuff that I want to do? How am I work is really, it's balanced, it's integrated. I do work-life integration, not balance, because I run my own business and it can be all over the place and international and all that sort of thing and travel. But I know that at the basis, the things that are most important to me are the things that I am really mindful about putting time into. And do I stuff it up? Yep. But I'm
Mhm.
mindful around going, what really matters here? Because think sometimes when we're stressed, we get really caught up in the minutiae.
Mhm. Yeah, it's such a great analogy, and it throughout the pandemic, when I looked into a lot of the papers then, and I found 6 key themes in the research that just kept cropping up across so many
Mm.
papers. And it was really throughout COVID that it was around narrowing our focuses and letting things go. We were
Mm.
short staffed, understaffed. We didn't have students, we didn't have teachers or support staff there. And everybody just kept trying to move at that same unrelenting pace without adapting. And I think a key takeaway from everything we've talked about today is about sitting with that awareness and adapting to meet the needs
Mm.
of
Mm.
yourself and those around you at any one time, rather than thinking you need to be at the same constant pace or state throughout your whole
Yeah.
career or your whole year throughout schools. That reduces a lot of that tension that we experience as leaders,
Yeah.
is to just adapt time and realize that we can't set up any of these processes and systems if we're not okay ourselves. And um, when I speak with schools about the importance of the conditions of a mentally healthy workplace or a wellbeing focused workplace and relationships, and then the support options, and then of course at the end of the day our staff also need the personal resources. I think, well, I know that in order for any of the conditions or the relationships or the support options to be put in place by the leaders, they need to have those personal resources and that capacity themselves.
Absolutely.
And can't leave that until last for
No,
our
and so,
leaders.
from Ferocious Warmth's perspective, this is the big part of the head and the heart work. The infinity
Yeah.
symbol is if we are looking after ourselves, we can do that tricky work. If we
Mhm.
aren't, people get our defaults. I call them the frayed zone. They get our default head or their default heart. And if we're really not looking after ourselves, people are going to get the
Mhm.
extremities, the fearsome leader or the enmeshed leader, really, rescuing people, cliques, sort of people are wary of us because we're emotionally dysregulated, or we're emotionally dysregulated in that we've shut down our emotions on the other side and we're so fearsome. Uh, this is such an important part of Ferocious Warmth that if we are not looking after ourselves, we cannot be giving people the optimal Ferocious Warmth leader we want to be. They're going to be getting our
Mhm.
extremities. And, I remember when the book first came out, I had a principal that came up and she said to me, "I read it and yes," and I realized that, I just went totally fearsome with a couple of people. Then I went home and I spent 2 hours awake. Then I came back in the morning and I was totally enmeshed and really trying to rescue the situation and being emotionally,
Pendulum.
victim. And I said, "Oh, you're doing the superhighway." She goes, "No, I was Miley Cyrus and I was on the wrecking ball." And this is what happens when we are not well. We are not emotionally, mentally well. We go to our defaults, and our defaults can have unintended outcomes because we're not reaching for those things that people need. So my mantra
Yeah.
around this is just a mantra that comes out of this is, leadership well-being is a leadership behavior. What we're doing every day, we can't see it as an add-on. And I know this is all so much from your work, Adrian, but we can't see it as an add-on. What we've got to go is actually me taking time and leaving it for today. That is not me being selfish. That
Mhm.
is me because I absolutely need to do it for a variety of whatever. And, the amount of people, especially uh, people who are juggling, then managing the family and, all those sort of things that go along with it, or even, older parents, whatever it is that's going on for you. Um, it is not selfish to go, what is it I need to be able to lead the fulfilled and very complex life that I have, that's not selfish. That's actually being able to give the most to yourself and the most to others.
Oh, definitely. And I'd recommend anybody tuning in to read the book if they hadn't. And this sort of link, this beautiful explanation also tied in really nicely, discussing about our
Mm.
needs as leaders and as educators and the shadow sides. And to add to this, I found, I was trying to search, okay, what are some of the symptoms that I have, or those shadow sides of me that can lead to either one? And what was really interesting to me was that the need for worthiness sat on both
Uh-huh.
sides.
Yeah.
So now because I went, that's my thing. And I went, oh, yes, that's why I can sometimes, my husband's like, I don't know who I'm going to get sometimes at really peak stressful times of work. Not all the
Yeah.
time, generally quite well, but I by no means ever claim that I'm perfect, as you know, when there are times of launching things or traveling a lot or hard feedback or good feedback, whatever it is, you can flip into different
Yep.
modes. And sometimes I'm definitely fearsome and can be enmeshed. And what was very interesting was that need sat on both sides
Yes.
for that. And I also heard, I think it was on my podcast with Em Gentle, she talked about how a lot of us get into caring professions like this because we want to get those needs met for worthiness, and like we are somebody and we're doing something and we're achieving something. So we land in a job like this to either get that sense or to give children and young people that sense too. So
Yeah.
it's probably a very similar mindset for a
Absolutely.
number of people.
Absolutely. And the one of the easy recalibrations, well, it's not easy, but I think the first one is a pause and awareness of ourselves. That's really, really useful. But when any of our heart shadows turn up, so maybe our empathy, our compassion is meaning that we start getting very, you know, offended at anything anyone says, or really avoidant of a hard conversation, or maybe we give too much of ourselves and we get burnt out, is to draw from the head, draw from the other side. Imagine yourself a tightrope walker and then be able to go, well, let me be objective here. how does this affect the students is a really good one. If I know I'm avoiding that conversation with that teacher, yet it's really affecting the students, that's a really good calibration back to the center of what's my role here, what's my responsibility to do that. And vice versa, if I know my head shadows are turning up, like instead of being great cognitive, evidence-based, all that sort of thing, I'm starting to get into controlling, making decisions on high, commanding, authoritarian, really getting adversarial if people don't see it the way I do, then what do? I need to go to the other side and just go, how are people feeling about this? And go and spend some time asking people those things, going and looking and connecting back to the human beings. And so that's a really good way to just recalibrate back to the center on that.
Mm. Oh, it's such a beautiful way of explaining it. We almost need this printed out and up in our offices as
Yeah.
our go-to. Aside from your books, Tracey, what tools, other books or practices would you recommend for leaders wanting to develop their skills
Yeah.
further?
I think it really depends on where your context is, So I
Mm.
really do believe that mindfulness and meditation can really help us. And some people meditate when they run, some people meditate when they're sitting down. It doesn't have to be a long time, but it's such an ancient way of centering. Um, Journaling is a really useful one. I find just listening to podcasts can really just spark my
Yeah.
energy and my inspiration. Um, I, uh, I tend not to listen to audiobooks. I've got Ferocious Warmth is actually an audiobook, and you can get it
Yes,
often
I
on
saw that.
Spotify
Yeah.
Premium if you're part of Spotify, unless you've left the platform. Um, but it's on Audible as well, and because a lot of people I know are in cars, and so they go, I listen to it
Mm.
in the morning. I tend not to be an audio listener because I start thinking about what they were saying, and then I've missed 4
Go.
chapters. Uh, but
I do that
but
too.
I think that one of the biggest things for me that has really supported me in the years over especially the last 5 years after I had a really traumatic thing go on in my life, and I really had to recenter myself as to I was looking after everyone. I was over functioning and I wasn't looking after myself, and I had to do a whole lot of rejigging, which I share that story in Ferocious Warmth, was to reach out and say to people, I need help. And then
Mm.
just to develop those squads. So I've got 2 really strong squads in my life that are 5 in one, 4 of us in the other. We make sure we put in time together through the year. I could ring them up at 2:30 in the morning and someone would answer my call. Um,
Mm.
we help each other, we laugh together, we come together and just do stupid things, fun things. We go to pub choir, but we also might just as much sit down and have a really important conversation around how we might be running our businesses. And those people I think that we have in our lives, whether they're mentors or just peeps you hang out with. I'm part of a mentor group as well that I have a coach. I just go, I can't do this by myself. Just working through life is a challenge. How do I make sure my relationships are really strong and I'm putting time into them? And how have I got those people that I just know I can go and talk to them about anything?
Mm. Absolutely. And when we think about coping, and I guess adapting, and those different strategies. So much of it can be focused on what we're doing, but our social resources or our personal resources with and connections with other people is a coping strategy. It's like a
Mm.
quarter
Mm.
of all of the other things that we're doing because they can give us the strategies or the perspective, or we can express ourselves emotionally to them, get that comfort. We can negotiate and bargain with them
Mm.
and their input. And so yeah, that common thing that we can do when we're exhausted to withdraw definitely almost like severs off all of the strategies and the supports that we could be seeking
Yeah,
if we were with
absolutely.
our network.
And
Really,
and I think the other thing that goes with that um, is how are we I reckon the comparison scale is a really good one for us to think about in school sometimes.
mm,
Um, I was doing a Women in Leadership program yesterday, and it was in healthcare, and there was a wonderful rural and remote GP there from Geraldton in WA, and she's amazing what she's been there for 40 years, what she puts into the community, and she's just an incredible person. And she comes from Iran. And so she has this incredible worry about her nation of birth and the people that she might know over there and the whole of the particular environment that we're in at the moment. And just hearing her just be willing and absolutely feel safe enough to say that to us it's just, sometimes we need those comparisons to just go, really, I've got it pretty good actually. And in our school, it's actually pretty good. We've got good kids. Or if you've got really, really challenging kids, there will be all these really great things that are going on that you're doing for those challenging kids. And so sometimes and I'm not not diminishing at all that in some places it is really hard to turn up every day. So I'm not talking at all about that. And I think there's major work that has to go on. But it can also be that we can get a little bit stuck in our world. And so I think that perspective popping that you were talking about is just critical, to just put ourselves on that scale that says, actually, it's not too bad. When it's not too bad. And when it is bad, what do I do to, reach out to the help that I've got?
It will pass, and it's why I love an autobiography. That's my way of building my understanding
Yeah,
of the really
nice.
hard times people can go through. And like, oh my God, I have it easy in comparison, never diminishing what I've been through or what I'm experiencing, but it's a great way to build that understanding. And, we're about to finish up, but I always say in schools that I go to, when we're beginning to look at their staff feedback or their staff wellbeing data, and I say, I wish I could download all of the knowledge and experience I have from working with all of these schools and play it for you in like a quick snapshot, so you can see how there are you have strengths here. And sure, we might be under the average or the norm here, but there are other schools or other settings, not where it's far worse, but where the challenges are much greater and more systemic, deeply rooted into families and community, where it feels like it's really out of our control.
Yeah.
And there's so much you can do. So if only maybe that function will exist in our lifetime,
maybe.
Tracey, to finish up, we see a number of quotes circulating online showcasing something really thought-provoking or inspiring from thought leaders from right across the globe and throughout time. If a quote from you was making the rounds, what would it say?
I mentioned that leadership well-being is a leadership behaviour before, but I think if we chunked up to what I think the world needs now from us, and I think all teachers are leaders. All teachers, that's absolutely a really strong belief that I have, is the world needs more leaders with the ferocity to lead transformation, as well as the warmth to inspire and connect people. And I think that shows that difference, that of the head and the heart coming together is what we need.
That infinity. Such a beautiful description. And the podcast is aptly titled Well-Led Schools, which is that play on words to reflect schools who lead with wellbeing in mind. So weaving it into the fabric of their school, not seeing it as an initiative. What is one thing that you think schools or school leaders could do to prioritise wellbeing that would make the most significant difference?
That when we're having conversations with each other, we're present and we're seeing and we're valuing each other.
Even the hard times, valuing the challenge.
Even more. Even more.
Yeah. Yes. Tracey, thank you so much for your time today. I said before we hit record that I was inspired, excited and nervous all at the same time, and I've walked away with fireworks going off in my brain, connecting so many different ideas. It was such an honor to have you on. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can have you on again soon when your new book comes out and talk all about what's covered in that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adrian. And, the conversation just kept on going, and I know we could just have such a great time if we
Oh
were
God. I know.
we were spending the day in the room together. So thank you so much, and thanks for the great questions, and also thank you for being such a really great um, unpacker and having great insight as to what this whole Ferocious Warmth approach is, because it just shows your level of research, but also how much you embody Ferocious Warmth yourself. So thank you.
Oh, I would honestly say this is the interview where I feel like our approaches are very
Yeah,
aligned and very enmeshed, but in a good way,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
woven together. So everything you said ticked all of the
Great.
boxes. So thank you
Thanks
so
so
much.
much.
What an episode. I'm honestly leaving the conversation with fireworks going off in my brain, and I hope that you are too. A genuine thank you to Tracey for her generosity, her wisdom, and the beautiful way that she weaves head and heart together in everything that she shares. Now, if this conversation has left you thinking about what it really looks like to lead with both well-being and performance in mind at a whole school level, I want to make sure that you know about our Well-Led Schools Partnership Program. It's a structured 12-month partnership that I run with schools right across Australia and internationally to help leaders move beyond fragmented wellbeing efforts and build a clear, strong strategic approach to wellbeing, psychosocial safety, and school culture. If that sounds like exactly what your school needs, head to adriennehornby.com.au/school partnerships. That's also in the show notes to learn more or to book a free clarity call to discuss your school and your needs with me. Everything that we discussed today is available wherever you're listening to this podcast. And if this conversation really resonated with you, please share it with a colleague, a fellow leader, or someone who's trying to navigate that balance between results and relationships. A review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred app also means that I keep reaching the world and the education space and supporting more and more educators right across Australia and beyond. Stay well and keep leading well. Thank you so much for listening to the Well-Led Schools podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review if you like this episode. I look forward to connecting with you at adriennehornby.com.au. Here you can get in contact with me, learn more about my approach to supporting staff wellbeing in schools, and get all the information you need about how to work with me. I'm Adrienne Hornby. Thanks for your time and stay well.